Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. We do have, seeing a quorum, I will call the February 14th, 2024 meeting of the Distress Unit Appeal Board to order. We have Tracy Brown is attending virtually. Welcome, Tracy. And we're in the midst of legislative session. So I think the Education Committee, where Representative Smith is still going on, which started at 10:30. And then Ways and Means, which Representative Thompson is the chairman of, I think kicks off at this time as well. So I believe it's, everyone's here who's gonna be here. So again, I called the meeting to order. Want to also note compliance with the open door law and all its required notices. Our first order of business is the approval of the minutes of the January 25th, 2024 executive session and public meeting, which were previously distributed. Are there any needed corrections or clarifications on the minutes? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of January 25th, 2024 for the public meeting and the executive session.
There's a motion. Is there a second? And there is a second. Let's, I guess, take the roll, correct?
Yes. Mr. Joyce,
Yes.
Ms. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Shackle. Yes. Mr. Holt,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
That's 5-0.
Minutes are adopted. Thank you very much. Next up is our public comment. And we have a few people signed up for that. Let's kick things off with Dr. Spangenberg. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Pleasure to be here. So after having come from a transitional board meeting last night, I have a lot of continuing concerns. When I last was here at a DUAB meeting and heard Mr. Joyce say, well, maybe closing of schools should be left up to the next superintendent, I was overjoyed. Like, it seems so logical, you know, as we move toward local control, that especially given the timeline of everything, and given that they're allegedly finding new money and new funds, and we're having increased enrollment, it only seemed logical at that time. However, unfortunately, last night, it was back to the same conversation of closing schools, except now we're couching it in really strange language, like footprint. We went from like consolidation to now footprints, and it just gets more and more obscure and vague. And it's not a process like much of the rest of the meetings that leads to any kind of public transparency. Like, people are confused about what's going on, and it's hard to get basic information. Last night, you know, when I came to the podium and did public comment there, I was concerned because I heard several different stories about what the situation with the literacy cadre was, and were we in it? Were we in cohort 1? Were we in cohort 2? Like, where were we with that process? And last night was the first time after I made that comment that happily I ever, I wish I would have known information beforehand. I don't feel like we're being set up for success. I really feel that we do need some kind of, and this is a concern that's been expressed to me by many community members, we need some kind of alternative audit that utilizes the gaps kind of, or the gap kind of framework. Because there's no transparency right now. I mean, if you look at when Hinckley came in and the kind of auditing they were doing then compared to the kind of auditing doing now, I feel like we've gotten less clarity over time. Some of the projections don't make sense. Some of the projections, there's still a lot of questions around, but there's really no opportunity to ask those questions because unlike neighboring school corporations like in Hammond, we only get to have public comment every other meeting. And so there's like a lag time that's pretty huge of like when something might get addressed, when you might ask a question, when you might hear back about it, and then we're talking months. The superintendent search still seems to be going very slowly, and I was disturbed by the notice because there was no requirement for a superintendent's license listed when this was brought to the attention of people who were doing the superintendent search at the so-called focus groups. They're not focus groups. It's 4 survey questions that are incredibly vague that are asked in the survey and in person. They were like, oh yeah, of course that'll be a requirement, but they had no response as to why that was not on the notice for the superintendent search. Quality of candidates we get and how that will set us up for future local control. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Loretta Tyndall.
Hello. To the DUAB board members and others in the room, I am Mrs. Loretta Tyndall, a voting and tax-paying resident of the city of Gary, which is one of the greatest jewels in the state. We as citizens want this board to ensure that details are given regarding plans for expenditures and the result of expenditures. Last evening, we were told in the board meeting of the Gary school system that $100,000 was being spent for buses. Is that per hour, per day, per week, per month? We need such details to be apparent to us, and I would expect to be apparent to you. Who is our academic officer for our school system? And why is that person not at our meeting today and on a regular basis? I would like for this board, when you think of students with the Gary Public School System, Gary Community School Corporation, I want you to remember that Black history is a part of our lives. It's a lifetime, not a month. I want you to remember such things as facts as Bernard Anthony Harris, who in 1995 became the first African-American to perform a spacewalk. I want you to remember that Mr. Hobart Theo Tatum was the principal of the great Roosevelt High School, the highly equitable and historically profound high school / learning institution that I attended and graduated from in 1966. And I'd like for you to get to the point when you think about that institution as you model the current school system in Gary and address the needs of our students, focusing on the importance of their education. All students' education, not leaving the special ed not leaving anyone out. But making sure that every child and every child's educational need is addressed. Did you know that yesterday was Black Love Day? You need to, or get an opportunity, look it up. I get the sense that the reason you're not holding our children in high regard is because you don't have enough space, enough time, enough money to accommodate our students. And I want to impress upon you that there is enough time and money to go around. And please don't leave our school system behind. Take over hands. Thank you.
I believe we have at least one person virtually, remotely, Attorney Tracy Coleman.
So we have to unmute.
Oh.
Just one moment.
One moment, please.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm Attorney Coleman, and I have some concerns that I'm asking that DUAB addresses today. As far as academic, we know that our representatives are considering Senate Bill 1, which would hold third graders back who do not pass the test. And right now with the Gary Community School Corporation, we have an academic crisis. When we look at Banneker at Marquette, only 44% of the students passed I read. Beveridge Elementary, 31% of the students. Daniel Hill Williamson with 49%. So we're dealing with a system in place where mostly half of our students are able to pass the I read. And so because of that, I want to know what safeguards are put in place to make sure this summer we can remediate the children who need it so they won't be held behind. Also, I'm asking for full transparency because as we prepare to get our new superintendent, that new superintendent should have a document which indicates what is the baseline that the superintendent is inheriting. And when you have kind of takeover, there's a transition plan which explores the governance, direction and programming, curriculum, fiscal management, personnel, facility issues. So that superintendent and that new board isn't going in blind. Also, I would like to add what resources will DUAB make sure that this new superintendent will have, because the reality for whoever sits in that seat of superintendent is that they're inheriting an academic crisis in Gary by the likes that we've never seen before. I would also like the state DUAB to consider allowing the school district to do an independent audit, even though the State Board of Accounts has its own audit. Transitioning, very important that that baseline of where the numbers are clear. And the audit of March 23rd, 2023 gave a qualified opinion on the COVID-19. Also indicated that there was non-compliance with grant. And then on page 24 of that report, it said the lack of internal controls and non-compliance were systematic issues throughout the audit period. It also showed the school corporation did not obtain price or rate quotes for all 5 vendors tested that were less than the acquisition threshold of $150,000, but exceeded the 10,000 micro purchase threshold. So therefore, we have to be concerned about the systems in place, especially since you had a scenario where your chief financial officer, emergency manager, and academic officer left at the same time. And lastly,
Go ahead and finish your thought.
Finish up, please. Attorney Coleman, if you wish to finish your thoughts.
Which is still there. She is no longer there.
Okay. Is there anyone else that wishes to make any comments during our public comment period? Okay. Thank you. We will move on with our agenda. Next up is our academic update. Mavis?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman. So last month, we provided some data that we'd like to get in the habit of sharing with you all and then set the precedent for the same data to be shared on a regular basis with the school board moving forward, just as a way to kind of monitor how things are going. That routine data is student attendance, suspensions at both the elementary and secondary level, and periodically iReady data, so which we do beginning, middle, and end of year. So I have that data to share today, and then I'll speak a little bit about what we're doing as a result of that data, because this is, of course, what we look at internally as well to kind of monitor how we're doing. So the first piece that we'll look at is student attendance. I promise next time I'll separate this out on 2 slides so it's slightly easier to read. But as you can see, our goal with attendance is 90%, and it's an area where we're really struggling. This is something we're seeing across the country. I think every school district has seen or maybe not every, but most school districts, and certainly on average, we've seen big dips in attendance post-COVID. I believe the last statistic I saw was 8% statewide. And it's, you know, something that we feel more acutely in districts like Gary, where there are more barriers to attendance. It's a complicated issue for high school students. It often comes down to behavior. For elementary, it is more often barriers within the family, which is just tricky to troubleshoot and make sure that we're supporting kids and families coming to school every day. So you can see that there are many areas, we're below that goal of 90% in every building. And particularly at our secondary schools, our attendance is quite low. It's something we're really working on. I think I announced in December that we had applied for and won a statewide family engagement grant in the amount of approximately $100,000 per year. That includes a coordinator position, which we'll speak to a little bit later in the meeting. But our hope is that we can use that person and some of that money to really work on some of these challenges that we're facing with attendance. The goal of that grant is to implement a research-based model known as the dual capacity framework, which is really all about just bringing families and school together on an equal playing field and working together for the benefit of kids versus, you know, the school dictating to families or vice versa. So we are working on this. We're also looking at options to kind of bulk up our attendance and truancy team so that we can make sure that we're identifying problems and addressing them as early as possible. Next up, we have.
Maybe just
yes.
before we leave this one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Out of the 2 of the 3 secondary schools, January had a drop off. Is that sort of seasonality after the holidays, or what? Is there a reason for that?
I would attribute it to weather.
Okay.
We had the week right after the 2 weeks right after the holidays, we had a snow day and a cold weather day. And we had, I think, 3 near misses where we sent devices home and we're kind of like, everybody watch, you know, to see if we're going to announce.
Okay.
And I think a lot of families, you know, see that and think school's canceled or it's difficult to get to school because, you know, the roads are bad in the morning. So I think that's the main reason for the drop in January. Great, so looking at suspensions then, ultimately our goal is to reduce suspensions. Now we've got to balance student safety and being able to work and support the students who are in the classroom. So if we've got, you know, really disruptive behavior or students who are creating unsafe situations, we do need to remove them from that environment. But in general, if students aren't in the building, we can't teach them, right? If we can't keep them in classrooms, we can't support their learning. So that's always our goal, is to reduce suspensions. The elementary schools have had a lot of success with this year. Implemented a lot of social emotional supports, a lot of kind of systematic behavior management. We also have a lot of, our principals are all established. They've been in their buildings for at least a couple of years now, which allows them to create systems including for just like procedures, movement in the building, kind of getting teachers in the hallways between passing periods, things like that, which all really help keep behavior down. That said, we do have a couple of hotspots. Beveridge Elementary is one of those. We are implementing a big social emotional learning initiative school-wide at Beveridge to help address this. We're getting supports out to that building. It's a school that's had challenges for a long time. They've made a lot of growth academically, and I think a lot of growth culturally as well, but there are still a lot of challenges there. It's also one of our schools that has the most transients, and the less stable our student population is, the more difficult it is to build that positive environment, because as kids are coming in, they kind of don't know the Beveridge way. They don't have connections to their teachers and administrators the way that kids that have been there all year do, and it just makes it a little bit more difficult. So that's what I would attribute that increase in suspensions to. If you want to go to the next slide. Sorry. The 2 other elementary schools, both good progress here at McCullough and Williams. They're both trending lower than last year in terms of suspensions. And then at our secondary buildings, we're looking at similar to last year at Gary Middle and Bailey STEM, depending on how the end of the year goes. At Westside, we do have an increase in suspensions. It's something, again, that we're really working on. We are understaffed at the administrative level at Westside and in security. It's one of the where having a good building and not having enough administrators and security to manage those times when kids are moving can allow things to escalate when otherwise we would be able to kind of keep a lid on it. So we actually just met yesterday with those teams to kind of help brainstorm and strategize how to collaborate and work. But, you know, as in all things, staffing often is a challenge, and that's one that's hurting us at Westside this year. Any questions about suspensions or attendance before we move on to iReady growth data? All right. We've talked about iReady before, but just as a reminder, this is a diagnostic that we use 3 times a year to gauge student growth. So iLearn tells us, you know, are they reaching that bar that's set statewide for all students? iReady is intended to go identify exactly where the student is and how much they're growing. We test in grades K through 8, like I said, 3 times a year. And then based on that diagnostic assessment, iReady creates a customized learning path in reading and math for students so that they can engage in independent lessons that very narrowly are designed to meet their needs. We also use that data to do other interventions. So identifying who are students who are at risk of not passing iRead, for example, and designing some customized interventions for them. We selected students for the Latera virtual tutoring, largely based on iReady data, or kind of starting with iReady and then using kind of what teachers are seeing in the classroom as the second lens. So we do use that for strategic grouping of students too. We'll start with reading, and I'll show kind of the same data for reading and for math. I've cut it 2 ways. The first is beginning of year to middle of year, so you can see how much students are growing this year. We do have growth from beginning to middle. We've got more students scoring mid or above and more students scoring early on grade level. But as you can see, we do have a large number of students who are not scoring on grade level. If you go to the next slide, P, we've got year over year, winter to winter, so you can kind of see how things are tracking. Now this is a slightly different cohort of students because some roll on and some roll off. You can see there's a small amount of growth. It's not huge, I don't want to overstate it, but anything positive is moving in the right direction. Reading is, I've spoken about literacy, I think at every meeting all year. It's been our focus all year. There are a number of things that we're doing to address this. Dr. Spangenberg mentioned it in public comment. We are engaged in the literacy cadre. We have been since its inception, and we have opted into the 3rd year now already. We have literacy coaches placed at all 5 of our elementary schools, and they do a lot of good work in building teacher capacity. The state gave all of our teachers in grades K3 access to a really wonderful phonics program, UFly, which our literacy coaches are helping teachers learn how to implement. It's on a pilot basis now because we received it in the middle of the year, but we're planning to implement it fully heading into next year. We've also continued to implement Heggerty, which is a phonemic awareness. That's that letter sound correspondence piece. Up through grade 3, and then it's being used in intervention at the upper grades. That started kind of on a limited basis last year and has been rolled out fully this year. And again, those coaches really support teachers in implementing that, looking at the data closely, designing small group instruction to target students' needs, and then helping support that implementation. Attorney Coleman brought up what are we going to do over the summer, and that's something that's a very timely conversation. We are in the early stages of designing it, but what we'd like to do is kind of a literacy boot camp where we get those 5 literacy coaches who've done a lot of training on the science of reading, as well as some of our strongest teachers, and have a summer school program that's just focused on building those foundational skills for the students who don't pass the spring iRead, which is coming up in just a couple of weeks. I'm hoping, and we'll see if we're able to pull this off because it does require aligning a few things, but I'd like to use that literacy boot camp as an opportunity to have some other teachers come observe our coaches implementing some of that good science of reading based instruction, working with our principals to observe so that they get a full understanding of what does it look like when it's done right from our best teachers, so we can make it a learning opportunity for students and a professional development opportunity for our teachers. So I'll report out more as we continue to build out plans for that piece. Moving on to math, I've got that. Oh, and we've got it by school, sorry. Yes, reading by school. So you can kind of see how it falls. Banneker has more students on grade level than others. They've done a lot of good work but they have a lot of volunteers coming in from the community as well, which has been a big help. We're trying to encourage folks to come in and read to our students We have representatives from the Divine Nine, historically Black sororities and fraternities coming in every Friday and reading to our students. We've got what we call foster grandparents coming in and working with some of our students. We've got a number of community volunteers, and Banneker's a spot that's really built that out, as has Williams. So you can see some of the growth in specific schools there. Moving on to math, you'll see the data is fairly parallel to what we're seeing in reading, but ultimately lower. You might look at this data and wonder why the big focus on literacy when math scores are lower and we're seeing less growth there. The challenge is if the student isn't able to read by 3rd grade, their lifetime opportunities are going to be severely limited. So whereas we can catch kids up in math after the fact, reading is just so critical for everything. And at the end of the day, if you're struggling with reading, even taking a math assessment is going to be difficult for you. You're going to struggle unpacking word problems and things like that. So while we're trying to balance both, and we are doing some work in math, our focus has been on reading for that reason. We actually have a math trainer working with a group of teacher leaders today. I left him this morning, and the focus has been on how do we build that conceptual understanding. Our students have a lot of gaps, and math, unlike other subjects, builds, right? If you miss one concept, it's going to be hard to learn the next grade levels. But if we develop that number sense and true conceptual understanding, it's much easier to catch up. So that's been a focus. We're also planning we've rolled out, and I spoke about this last night, we have put out a request for proposals from teachers who have some expertise to share some professional development that they lead so that teachers are hearing from their peers. And we don't have a lot of time built into our schedule for professional development, which is a big barrier, but we do have some ESSER money set aside to stipend those teachers for staying after school or staying on Saturdays for some of that peer learning. And then ultimately what I think is most exciting is that we're hoping to do a significant amount of professional development over the summer, which we'll be able to stipend teachers for as well. We can't get everybody because people do need to take their vacations, but we're hoping that we'll be able to bring a lot of teachers in to do some of that multi-day thinking outside of their classrooms where they can really dig into the content and into some strategies. So going to the year over year, it was similar to reading. We do see a little bit of growth from last winter to this winter. Nothing huge, not nearly what we want to see or what we know our students are capable of, but growth is growth. And then you can see on the final slide where some of the highest growth is by building. Again, Banneker leads the pack in terms of number of students on grade level. We saw some really good growth at McCullough. We've got an absolute rock star of a 3rd grade teacher at McCullough who's doing some really good work there. I'm hoping we'll lead one of those PDs. Bailey's done some good work and seen some growth. So there are some bright spots, but a lot still to do, particularly in the math. Any questions about that before we jump into finance?
Any questions for Maeve? You had made reference to Laterra, in sounds like, some of their activities are feeding into some of these decisions and planning, but can you speak to, are they fully ramped up and fully engaged now? And
this is week 2 of full implementation. We had a few schools start a little bit early, but last week was when everybody was online, and then this is week 2. We're working out some, technology kinks. Chromebook won't recognize the headphones, that kind of thing. But overall, it's been really successful. I think teachers are working through, how do I frame it with kids? How do I set them up? Physical classroom. So we're working through some of that, but they are fully ramped up. We had good attendance at the tutoring sessions, both from the tutors and from the students. So our matches are kind of cemented now. Too early to share anything really beyond that, but yes, we're off to the races.
okay, very good. Any other questions from Mavis on the academic?
And I'll say we did pick 6th grade and 9th grade our math tutoring for that reason, to help fill in some of these challenges.
Okay. Let's move on to finance.
Thank you. Before I begin my presentation, a bit of good news that I shared last night at the board meeting is our projections are built on 4,025 students. As of yesterday at 4:30 p.m., the enrollment in Gary Community Schools was 4,103 with only 2 pending conflicts. So a nice bump in students in the spring, which helps these financial projections. But as I said, these are all based on 4,025, as that's kind of where we thought we were going to land when we started these for December. What I've prepared, similar to what Mavis said, is we are starting to model for the board what they should expect to see every month from superintendent and administration. So last night was a bit of a primer on Indiana school, but then also on here's the kind of reports you should expect to see from the district administration monthly. So we began by exploring the key funds. This is a just sort of a preview of what you're going to see. Is we're going to talk about annual, monthly financial reporting, budget versus actuals, and then how we have spent the grant funding and special funding we've received through 1065. So began with the building blocks of the budget, which are key funds and where they come from. Explained that, federal government provides Title I school lunch, school improvement grants. State is the education fund, textbooks and special education. Local is your property taxes for the operations fund, as well as our referendum fund. And then a district seeds its own rainy day fund through the ability to run surplus or one-time gifts that a district would receive. Moved on to describe the revenue that we have brought in last year, as well as when we received that. And again, this is all information that you've seen before. We wanted to make sure that the board and the community was seeing it, as well as the staff. We think it's important for the staff to understand where the money's coming from and where it's going. Also talked a little bit about the referendum and what the purpose of a referendum is, to basically offset operational expense, gives you the ability to renovate and upgrade your facilities. And in our case, also went toward teacher salaries, which helped us recruit and retain teachers. Wanted to show a timeline of when our funding comes in and explain to the board that sometimes in the operations fund, you might be running in a deficit on a given month because the property taxes haven't came in yet. And typically that'll happen beginning of December or beginning of June based upon them coming in. And it's very, as you can see on the next couple slides, actually.
Yeah.
It's very spiky. Then we will get into what the budget has looked like the last couple of years for Gary Community Schools. As you know, this would be the 3rd year that we project running into a surplus, or the 2 years we have surplus, and now 3rd year of a surplus, which is we told them, you want to see the orange line above the blue line. And that signifies that there is an operating surplus for the year. And then we showed how this district ended for 2023 on the next slide, with particular attention played to the second to last and last columns, and really focused on the bottom line of that. And just so we all are familiar or with the terms as we're using them, net operating surplus being the amount left over based upon the amount of funding you got in that year. And your operational cash reserve really being your savings account that you build up over multiple years of surplus. So you can see we ended the year with almost a 15% net operating surplus and 27.2% of an operational cash reserve. And then we project for 2024, as I said. I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure I'm following this. So on the net operating surplus here of the 12.4 million, Pete, if you toggle back to the previous slide, we've got 4.9. So that's net of transfers though.
Yes.
So we have a series of transfers in and out of funds. And that's the difference between the 5 and the 12.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you for saying that.
Okay.
And then for 2024, like I said, our projections now are going to need to be revised with increased enrollment, but we show ending the year with a 3.2% operating surplus, but a 30% operational cash reserve. Then a slide that I have committed that we're going to show every time we make a presentation the next 4 years look good. But without the referendum and or the increase of enrollment or the consolidation of schools, we forecast a deficit out into the future in 28, 29. Then this is what we told about the board that they could expect from the district monthly, is each of the funds and a budget versus actuals of how we are ticking through. So next month, when I present to DUAB and to the school board, you'll see January and February and how we're moving at our budget. The one thing that I will say is, in some cases, the budget is not the total amount of revenue. That's where we've said the line stops. So what we went over last night with the school board was what are the major expenses that hit each of these funds and where are they coming from? Because it is important that you're using the appropriate fund for the appropriate expenses. So in education, you can see that a lot of it is salaries. And then we also transfer money out of education to operations as allowed by law and into 1065. Then for the operations fund, which I explained also is limited by circuit breakers and has to get some help seating that from education. Major things are really the operations of the school district, services and charges being vendors that we need to contract with to do work for us, plumbers, electricians, transportation being a huge chunk, big expense for a school district. And then utilities, you know, the other thing that I talked about with the board last night and made a special emphasis of is you have to make sure all your fixed costs are covered. And that using utilities as the example, that's a bill that you always have to pay. Replacing filters should be seen as a fixed cost as well. And preventative maintenance cycles should be seen as a fixed cost as well, not things that are nice to do if you have money left over. That's how you know you're fiscally solvent and that you are fiscally stable, is we can cover those things that must be done. Moving on to debt service. Similar graph showing that there are also transfers out of this for 1065 at the current time. And a little bit later, we'll talk about what we've done with 1065 money or going to continue to do. The referendum fund, all the money passes out of that into operations with a transfer also into education to help cover salaries, as we were talking about earlier.
You know, monthly. Like if I'm looking at education operations, that's more than 1/12. So I assume in the summer we spend less, but you know, do you just do an annual budget? Or do you
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. We do an annual budget. What we're going to talk about with the board is as we go through these monthly, this was what are all the big charges that hit us annually. We're going to go monthly because the insurance bill comes quarterly. So you're going to see a spike. Utility bills spike in winter and summer. And we'll talk about what the major hits are because there won't be an annualized 1/12 spend month over month. And many times too, especially with this being the first month of the fiscal year for us, you have December bills that are coming into January's budget and being paid. So thank you for bringing that up. Then we had received some questions and wanted to provide some information on how we have spent our ESSER funding. As you know, ESSER 1 was the smallest of the funds to come in through ESSER, and much of that was spent in our case on instruction and in technology, getting devices and kids. This is mid-pandemic at this time, so these are getting devices to kids so there can be remote learning, as well as some work in operations and maintenance. Then ESSER 2, you can see a much greater investment in ESSER 2 went into operations and maintenance of the buildings. And then finally, ESSER 3, which we are in right now, the great portion of that has went toward instruction and things that help students in the classroom, but also a rather significant amount we've also been able to help put in our facilities. We've been very fortunate to be able to use our ESSER funds to help us get back to a level we need to be in our buildings. The board asked a question last night, you know, what are the critical needs out there that remain unaddressed? And I'm pleased to say there are very few critical needs that are not going to be addressed with either 1065 or their ESSER funding that we have, then at this point, we'll just be in a regular maintenance cycle. Next is a categorization of how we have used the 1065 funds in the district. As you can see, the majority of these have went to what I call not sexy renovations, where you're replacing HVACs, you're replacing roofs that are critical. And we also use some 1065 funds for demolition of Lew Wallace High School. And just last meeting, as you know, you approved our amendment to replace HVACs and improve HVACs at the remainder of our buildings that needed major HVAC renovations. And then finally, the last slide represents year over year what our debt obligation looks like for the district. So if the district were to take on no more debt, they would have almost no debt in 2024. I explained to the board last night that debt is a good thing if you can pay your bills, and that the district should take on debt as debt rolls off, so they can continue to do capital improvements and to do things that cannot fit within the operational budget. So, you know, the DUAB board probably is a better person or group to speak about this than me, but it's not like you can use your debt service funds for other things. So that money is used to pay off debt. Debt is a good thing if you can pay your bills. That concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions or take suggestions for other things that maybe the board should be seeing on a monthly basis.
Questions for Dr. Roser?
You guys said you had an increase in enrollment. Where was that at?
We're in that right now.
Next time we'll bring kind of grade levels.
Curious where it's at, where
Yeah.
you're gaining.
We just certified today, so we wanted to wait till that was done before we kind of did an analysis, but we'll share that next time.
Yeah.
Could you also break it down between brick and mortar and charter or virtual? You have a virtual presence?
Yes. Yeah.
Break it down, don't lump it together.
Yeah, definitely.
So, have you gotten any reaction from the board, about that, did they like what they saw, or do they want changes, or what, any reaction?
The questions that we got were, and it's a future deliverable we're gonna give the board, was really around what deferred maintenance is, you know, what's looming out there. And we promised for the next meeting and then that we'll bring forward what's the capital plan look like for the district? What's looming out there? What is it, any deferred maintenance that maybe isn't taking place or hasn't taken place as we were getting back on our feet?
Okay.
And I can tell you, Mr. Suggs actually had an email to both of us this morning. saying,
Yes.
This is good. Here's some additional things I'd like. So
Okay,
they're
good.
definitely following
Good.
it and wanting more.
Because I think on the bar charts, sort of, I think this is where Pete was going with his questions. It's one thing to look at it and say, oh, 8% a month, but there's a lot of seasonality
Yeah.
to these expenses. And so being able to provide either backup, table to those bar charts, or have the percentages there and just say, oh, well, we should be, at 8, if you do a straight line, but because of the winter, higher utility bills or contracts that come due at certain points of the year, I think is gonna help the new board members.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anything else on the financial update? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move into, we have one expenditure authorization for the community outreach coordinator, which we heard a little bit of. Pete?
Yeah, maybe just mention, this is a grant that Gary's received to promote family engagement, and about half of the money is for a full-time position to actually carry out the program itself. So that was submitted to me last month and I approved it for a salary up to $50,000.
Could you tell me if that person's gonna be in school or out of school or virtual?
She'll be in person, working in, where she actually was, accepted this morning, so excited to share that we have identified that person. She's been working at Westside in the front office, and she'll just come on over to central office. Now she'll have kind of flex hours because there will be evening events and things like that, but she'll work with our existing family and community engagement team really closely to just amplify the work that they're doing.
Any other questions? Okay. Next is a benchmark. I think this has to do with the graduation rate, which we covered several of the metrics a couple of meetings ago, but this wasn't finalized yet through the Department of Education, which it has since been. But Pete, do you want to cover any of
You're
the?
still on my thunder.
Oh,
So, the state's contract with the emergency manager, most of it is via, fixed monthly rate, but then also there are several benchmarks. And so this is going to be the final benchmark for year one of the contract, 2022-23, which is the graduation rate. And we wait on this one because we wait for DOE, which provided those numbers at the end of December. So in that cohort of the class of 23, there were 241 kids and 199 of them graduated for a rate of 82.6%. And you can see on the contract itself that that would be a achievement of tier 2 for the contract years.
okay. With the payment at $100,000, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions?
And was this an increase?
I don't remember what the year before was.
I'm not gonna remember it right off the top of my head, but I believe it was just a little bit over 80%. So yes, it is an increase.
So then for year 2 of the contract, it is, this now becomes the baseline. So next year won't be raw percentages, it'll be a percentage increase over this 82.6.
It's a pleasure of the board.
Make a mention that we authorize the tier 2 payment of $100,000.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Second. Any additional questions? Hearing none, let's take the roll.
Mr. Joyce,
Yes.
Ms. Brown, Mr. Shackle,
Yes.
Mr. Holt,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
passes 5-0.
Who was our second on
Mr. Teresa.
that? Proceed. Two different answers.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm
The
sorry.
second.
I misunderstood your question.
We have that all squared away.
Yeah.
Very good. Is there any other business to come before the board today? Hearing none, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. I'll take the paper. Today I get all my chip clips from.
Switch over times.
I'm sure we've got some in the office.
Yeah, keep it up.
Well, it's a